All right, welcome back. We're on episode 33 today. We're going to talk about validation again today, with applicatives even. But one of the things that I want to show is the power of applicatives with validation, which we didn't exactly show in some of the other. Because in the other videos, what we were really dealing with was this concept of parallel processing. In this case, though, we're going to show validation. And we're actually going to pull in a little bit of a different dependency this time. We're going to pull in data.validation, which comes from Folktale. And what that's going to allow us to do is to have this success and this failure. And as it turns out, this is, well, it's a little different. It's a functor and it's an applicative, but they don't actually provide a monadic, a bind or a chain or something for it. But as it turns out, that's okay, because we don't really want to deal with that anyway. We still have Ramda, we have curry in, and we've got some different things that we're going to do to test. So let's take a look at it. So we've got a not blank function, and basically this just kind of null coerces or whatever this x, and if x is some sort of truthy value, we're going to return success of x. Else we're going to return a failure. And if you notice, in this failure, we're passing an array, an array with one item in it. And we'll see why that's important here in a bit. So if we wanted to actually run that, we could say if we passed null into not blank, then we would get a failure. And the value, we would get an array that contained the text required here, because that's what we passed in and because it wasn't valid. Of course, if we were to pass foo, then we would get a success and the value is a foo. So if you're starting to think, wow, that looks a lot like an either, you would be right. There is a slight difference here with validation. As we've already seen, is that the failure case is going to contain an array, which as it turns out is really great from a user experience standpoint. So often when you're validating a form, or if you're doing validation on some value like this, there may be several different things that are required for it to be valid. And in this case, what I have here is I've taken this not blank, which if we look takes some a and returns a validation. Success and failure are just two ways to create a value of the same type. So a validation is a sum type, very similar to what we saw for maybes and eithers. So it's a sum type, and it can be either a success or a failure. We have max length, and we're just going to kind of coerce that x here into a string, and we're going to find the length of it. And if that length is less than what the max length that we pass in, then it's a success. Else it's a failure that it's too long. Not white space. We're just doing a regex test here to say whether or not it's a success or a failure. And what we really want to do is to be able to combine all these things up and to say that we either have a success or a failure. So we want to take this function, and this function, combine them all together, run all of them, and then find out all of the things that are wrong. And that's exactly what we've done with combined. So this combined function, it takes a length and an x, because that's the minimum set of arguments that we need to be able to use all three of these. And what we're going to do is we're going to leverage Ramda's curry in, and we're going to wrap that in a success. Why do we wrap this in a success? And why do we have this? As it turns out, what Ramda's curry in is going to do for us here, this is basically just creating a function that takes three arguments out of thin air, basically. And what we're doing here is this curry in just also then accepts a function that we have to pass to it. We don't really even care what this function is. This could be any function at all, and we're not even going to use it. It's just to fulfill the signature of this. And then we wrap it in a success. Why do we wrap it in a success? As we've seen, with applicatives, there are two different ideas for it. One is that an applicative can be used to lift things, which is what I've spent most of the time doing. But in this case, what we're going to look at it as is an applicative as a way to deal with functions in a context. And so what we've done here is we've generated this function on the fly, thanks to curry in, and then we're wrapping it in our success, which is a context. So now that we have a function in a context rather, now we can apply over that these different functions. And the result ends up being basically what you would expect. So if we do our combined validation of max length of 10 and we pass it blank, you see we get a failure, but the value this time, now we have it's required and cannot be white space. The reason it's cannot be white space is because of my implementation here. It would probably make a little bit more sense if I did this, I guess, for the value, except that now we would lose the required. So you see, all of the things that fail from the total from like the conglomeration here of not blank, max length, and not white space will show up. It'll all be in arrays. So another example here, what if we passed 3 spaces and we said the max length for that field was 2? Well, it can't be white space and it's too long. It's kind of an interesting one that we may not have thought about before, but that we get when we start combining all of these small functions together that worked. Here, if we combined 1 and 12, it would be too long. And then, of course, if we had a 3 and we passed the 12 in quotes, then we would still get our success. And we would basically just have no value. But the reason we have no value is because I was passing no value here. So what we could really do, I guess that might make a little bit more sense, is what we could do is we could say that to x, and then we get whatever value it was that we passed in comes out in the very end. So there you have it, a little bit of a different thing. Actually not using Ramda Fantasy. Ramda Fantasy, there are ways to do this sort of thing, but Folktale has this nice data validation context or type built in, and works really, really well when you have a bunch of different things and you want to give the user all of the errors for the field for whatever this combined validation is, rather than just simply giving them back the first one that failed. We're going to run all of them and aggregate all of those things together into that array. Hope you enjoyed it, and let me know what you think.